It's a story told for thousands of years. A beautiful queen, a stolen love, a 10-year siege, a wooden horse, and a burning city. The Trojan War. We've heard it in poems, seen it in movies, and imagined it in marble ruins. But here's the real question. Did it actually happen? Did Achilles really battle Hector? Did Paris truly steal Helen? And most importantly, did Troy fall? For centuries, scholars called it myth, a legend penned by Homer, no more real than dragons or mermaids. But then, archaeologists dug beneath the hills of modern-day Turkey, and the ground started whispering secrets. Beneath the poetry, there's history, and beneath the rubble, there might just be truth. Keep listening as we unravel the mystery. We'll separate fact from fiction, myth from memory. The real story of the Trojan War is wilder and more surprising than you ever imagined. Homer's epic or historical clue. When we talk about the Trojan War, we usually start with one man, Homer, the poet who composed the Iliad and the Odyssey sometime around the 8th century BCE. His verses gave us the larger-than-life characters we still know today: Achilles, Hector, Paris, Helen, and Odysseus. But was Homer recording real history or just spinning a grand tale? The Iliad focuses on a few weeks near the end of a 10-year war. It doesn't tell us how the war started or even how it ended. The famous wooden horse doesn't appear in the Iliad at all. But the emotion, the grief, the rage, those feel deeply human, real. Homer wasn't just inventing entertainment, he was preserving memory. Scholars believe the Iliad and Odyssey were based on older oral traditions. These stories were likely passed down for centuries before Homer shaped them into verse. That means the events they describe could have roots in the late Bronze Age, roughly 1200 BCE. It was a time when great cities were falling, trade routes collapsing, and entire civilizations were in flux. And Homer didn't just make up Troy. He described it as a wealthy, fortified city near the sea, with wide streets, strong gates, and towering walls. For centuries, no one knew if such a place ever existed. But then, when you read the Iliad carefully, some details stand out. The names of rivers, the layout of walls, the customs of warriors, and the alliances between kingdoms. They hint at a world that was once real. Homer might not have visited Troy, but he echoed the memory of a place that lived in the collective Greek imagination. For ancient listeners, these stories weren't fantasy. They were the echoes of their own past, layered with myth and meaning. Digging up Troy, what the ground reveals. In the 1870s, a self-taught archaeologist named Heinrich Schliemann arrived in northwestern Turkey, driven by one goal: to find Troy. Many scholars thought he was chasing a fantasy, but Schliemann believed Homer's words were more than myth. He began excavating a hill called Hizerlik and made history. Layer by layer, Schliemann uncovered not one city, but many. Troy wasn't a single place frozen in time. It was a mound built up by centuries of occupation. Beneath the surface were ruins of at least 9 different cities, built one atop another. This type of site is known as a tell, a layered cake of civilizations, each one built over the ashes of the last. Schliemann believed he had found Priam's Troy, the city Homer described. But in his excitement, he dug too deeply and too hastily, damaging the very layers that may have held the clearest clues. Later archaeologists, like Wilhelm Dorpfield and Carl Blagen, brought more precision to the site. They used better tools, more precise methods, and modern dating techniques. And eventually, one layer stood out: Troy 7A. This level of the tell had high walls made of large limestone blocks. Its houses were tightly packed, as if the people feared an attack. And then, suddenly, it was gone. Burned, collapsed, looted. Destroyed around 1200 BCE, the same era as the legendary Trojan War. The match wasn't perfect, but it was close. The timing aligned. The destruction was clear. The wealth of the city, gold, ceramics, trade goods, matched Homer's description of a prosperous Troy. Suddenly, the Iliad didn't feel so mythical. Even more compelling, other cities around the eastern Mediterranean had fallen around the same time. The Mycenaeans in Greece, the Hittites in Anatolia, and the Egyptians all were dealing with upheaval. This era is now known as the Late Bronze Age collapse, a period of sudden and mysterious decline. Major powers crumbled, trade routes disappeared, entire cultures vanished. The Trojan War may have been just one part of this much larger storm. a final, fiery act in a century of chaos. Further excavations revealed even more details: charred beams, arrowheads, smashed pottery, evidence of siege, of violence, of panic. And at the same time, written records, like Hittite tablets, spoke of a city called Wilusa, with leaders who shared names eerily close to Homer's. They described conflicts, alliances, and even diplomatic marriages with kings from the west, perhaps Mycenaean Greece. The archaeological picture is far from complete. There are gaps, debates, and mysteries, but it's also rich and suggestive. It tells us that while Achilles and Hector may be legend, the setting was real. Troy stood, Troy thrived, and Troy fell in fire and fury, just as the poet said. Who were the Trojans and who attacked them? We think of the Trojans as a distinct people, enemies of the Greeks, but who were they really? The city we now call Troy sat near the Dardanelles, a key waterway connecting the Aegean to the Black Sea. This was more than a scenic spot. It was a strategic prize, a gateway for trade, migration, and control. Whoever held Troy could tax ships, guard merchants, and wield immense influence over east-west commerce. The people of Troy likely spoke a language related to Luwian or Hittite, not Greek. Their culture was more Anatolian than Aegean, more Eastern than Western. They wore different clothes, practiced different customs, and were politically and linguistically tied to powerful neighbors like the Hittite Empire. In fact, Hittite tablets recovered from the capital of Hattusa mention a city called Wilusa, which many scholars now identify with Ilios, Homer's name for Troy. They also mention a ruler named Alexandru, possibly Paris, whose alternate name in Greek lore is Alexandros. It's a tantalizing overlap. And what about the attackers? The Greeks in Homer's tale were the Achaeans, early Mycenaeans. These were not the later city-state Greeks of Athens and Sparta. These were Bronze Age warriors from mainland citadels like Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos. They sailed long distances, traded far and wide, and maintained a complex network of alliances and rivalries. They were wealthy, ambitious, and armed to the teeth. They didn't just seek conquest, they sought reputation, glory, and access to resources. If Troy controlled access to the Dardanelles, it controlled trade, and trade meant wealth. Ships carrying tin from the east, gold from Nubia, and grain from the Black Sea all passed through that narrow corridor. The war may not have been about a woman, but about power, about economic supremacy, and about who got to control the lifelines of ancient commerce. The Hittites, too, mention conflicts in western Anatolia involving Mycenaean-style warriors. One letter describes a Wilusa incident that nearly sparked a full-blown war. Was that the spark of the Trojan War? Maybe. Or maybe it was one of many such sparks, fanned into mythic flame by generations of storytelling. Some scholars now believe the conflict at Troy may have been part of a broader series of clashes, maybe multiple attacks over generations. A Mycenaean raid here, a rebellion there, tensions flaring, truces breaking, alliances shifting. Not a single 10-year war, but a pattern of rivalry and violence remembered as one grand tale. And here's where it gets even more fascinating. The ancient world didn't always keep perfect records. Stone tablets break, parchments rot, but songs survive, stories survive, passed down by bards and poets, recited around fires, and remembered in rhythm and rhyme. Sometimes history remembered in song outlives the facts written in stone. So who were the Trojans? They were a powerful Anatolian people living at a geopolitical crossroads. And their enemies? Not just jealous Greeks, but ambitious powers who wanted what Troy had: control, access, prestige. Whether the war was one great clash or many small ones, its memory burned hot enough to echo for millennia. The horse, the fire, and the legacy. Now for the part everyone remembers, the wooden horse. According to later myths, especially Virgil's Aeneid, the Greeks tricked the Trojans by offering a giant wooden horse as a peace offering. Inside, hidden soldiers waited. The Trojans, believing the war was over, dragged the horse through their gates as a trophy. That night, while the city slept, the Greeks emerged, opened the gates to their comrades, and Troy burned. Did this really happen? Probably not with a literal horse, but the concept, the trickery, the betrayal? Very possible. Some historians believe the horse may have been symbolic, perhaps a siege engine or a battering ram. Others suggest it was a ship. Hippos in Greek meant both horse and certain types of boats. Or maybe it was a poetic metaphor for a secret attack. But something brought Troy to its knees. Fire, cunning, collapse. That much is clear. The burning of Troy 7a is not a myth, it's an archaeological fact. The city was destroyed suddenly and violently. Scorched ruins, crumbled walls, skeletons, and collapsed homes. Whether it fell to Greek invaders, sea peoples, or internal betrayal, the result was the same. Troy was no more. But the Trojan War didn't just end in rubble. Its legacy caught fire. The Greeks saw it as a defining epic, a crucible of heroism and hubris. Achilles and Hector weren't just warriors, they were archetypes. Rome traced its noble bloodline to Aeneas, a Trojan refugee. In the Middle Ages, knights in armor saw themselves reflected in these Bronze Age heroes. And today, we still do. Poets, painters, sculptors, playwrights, filmmakers, everyone has taken their turn with Troy. It's been reborn in marble, oil, and celluloid. The myth expanded, but it stayed anchored in something real. Perhaps Troy's fall wasn't one explosion of war, but a slow collapse, a series of raids, betrayals, and battles wrapped into one lasting legend. And yet, the core idea endures, that a proud city can fall not by force, but by cunning. Then inside every stronghold, there's a vulnerability. The horse, whatever it was, is a symbol of strategy, deception, and tragic downfall. Why does it still captivate? Because the story of the Trojan War has everything: love and loss, courage and cowardice, revenge, fate, and fire. It touches every corner of the human experience, and somewhere beneath the legend, beneath the ashes and the epic lines, there's that kernel of truth. A city that stood, a war that happened, a fire that burned, a memory that refuses to die. Conclusion. For centuries, the Trojan War seemed like a fantasy, too grand, too poetic, too filled with gods and heroes to be real. But history has a strange way of hiding in plain sight. Beneath Homer's verses lie a core of truth, a city named Troy, a war that scarred it, and a legacy that shaped the ancient world. Was there a Helen? Maybe. Was there a wooden horse? Unlikely. But was there conflict, destruction, drama? Absolutely. The Trojan War, in some form, did happen, and whether it was over a queen, a trade route, or pride, it left a mark so deep that it is still being talked about 3,000 years later. So next time you hear of Achilles or the burning of Troy, remember, it's not just myth. It's memory. It's history with a heartbeat. And that's what makes it endure. Because sometimes the greatest legends are a little bit real. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about the Greeks and their history, check out our book, Ancient Greece, a captivating guide to Greek history starting from the Greek Dark Ages to the end of antiquity. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you found the video captivating, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.